In episode 4, Love has dragged Gil into the cage, and she's left Joe to clean up the mess. Ideally, Joe would just like to treat this as water under the bridge. He starts trying to leverage Gil by saying, hey, you forget about what we did, and we'll forget about you endangering our son. But that sparks Gil in an anti-vax rant. Through some more conversation, Joe realizes that they've basically found the one person that might actually be willing to forget about this in Madre Linda. And Gil says, yeah, I'm willing to let bygones be bygones, but Joe doesn't believe him. Joe thinks the best way to handle the Gil situation is finding some dirt on Gil so that he keeps their secret, they keep his. Figures he'll do that while working at the library. But before he can even start, Gil comes up spontaneously by Dante because Gil was supposed to read to the kids, but he didn't show up. And that draws a pretty big red flag. Joe then gets a phone call at work from Love, who's very concerned because the community is going to go out and search for Natalie in the woods. The police found the ring in the rental property, and this move actually makes a ton of sense, but she's concerned. Joe says just continue to act normal, and honestly, you should probably volunteer. It won't look suspicious if you do that. After getting off the phone with Love, Joe finally gets into digging on who Gil is, and it's not great because Gil is the modern-day version of Ned Flanders. The only red flag is that he had a job at a college that he left abruptly, and around the same time, a female student was attacked, but the description doesn't fit Gil at all. He also needs to cover his tracks on why Gil didn't show up for the reading. So he starts writing an email to the library apologizing from Gil and saying that something came up. And that's when he gets caught by Marion, the librarian. She wants to know if he took one of these rare books that's missing, and he did. He took it to sell for Ellie, but he plays it off like he took it just to read it. And she gets really annoyed. She says, Joe, for those of us who didn't grow up with first editions as coasters, and Joe immediately cuts her off and sets the record straight that he didn't grow up rich and privileged. He grew up an orphan that was taken in by a guy who ran a used bookstore. That's it. Joe's background actually helps Marion see him in a whole new light. But back over with Love, she was so stressed out that she closed the bakery early, and when she headed home, she could hear Theo arguing with Matthew. Theo doesn't want to go on the search for Natalie at all. He doesn't want to join the Instagram squad that's going to go out and try to get likes. But the main thing that really upsets him is the fact that they're convinced that Matthew did it, so he doesn't want to go out and help sharpen the pitchforks for the townspeople. Love, however, is able to convince him to go, saying that if he doesn't go, the optics are going to be terrible, and she volunteers to be his search partner. Later that night, Joe and Love are discussing the whole Gil situation, and Joe lets her know that he couldn't find a good secret on Gil. He even went to Gil and asked, but the secret that Gil gave him was terrible. Love then brings up that maybe the only option they have is just to get rid of Gil. This sparks a pretty big argument between the two, and it crescendos with Joe yelling at her, I'm not going to kill anyone else for you. They both end up turning in for the night, but they both still have this Gil situation to deal with. And the next morning, when Love's mom comes over to watch Henry, she asks her, hey, does Dad still have that private investigator? And Dottie says, yeah, he does. Why? And Love has to think on her feet, and she tells Dottie that she finds the guy that she's renting the bakery from a little sketchy, and she just wants to look into him. In reality, she wants to look into Gil. And it doesn't take long for the private investigator to contact her back, and he's found something. It's a cheating scandal. So armed with evidence, Love and Joe head to the cage. Gil's oldest son, Alan, goes to Dartmouth, but he didn't get in the most normal ways. First of all, he had a perfect SAT score, which is possible, but pretty unlikely. There's also his transcript. It says he had an All-American water polo career that was derailed with an injury. And Gil says, that's not my son. And Love says, well, it's in his transcript. Here's something else that's in his transcript. A $50,000 donation to a fund to help underprivileged kids go to college. The thing about that is there is no fund. Most of the money went to some girl that Alan graduated with. She's a former cheerleader. Love figures that this was a pact between the families, but by Gil's reaction, Joe can tell he had no idea about this. This was all Gil's wife's doing. And Gil slumps down and says, oh God, Alan, you did it again? And that's when it dawns on Joe that Gil didn't attack that girl at the college. It must have been Alan. And they had to pay off the cheerleader because Alan must have did something to her as well. Gil really believed that Alan was never going to do this again. It was a one-time thing, and he's pretty upset about it. So Joe and Love end up leaving him in the cage for the night to just kind of be with his thoughts, which is a bad move. Because the next day, when Joe goes to check up on Gil, he hung himself in the middle of the night. Both Joe and Love are trying to figure out what exactly they're going to do. While they're trying to do that, Love gets a text message from Theo saying, hey, I'm heading out to the park. I'll meet you there. Because that's the day of the search. So Love gets up to leave, but then it hits her like a eureka moment. They have a body that they don't want anyone to find, and they have a dead body of a guy who they were trying to keep quiet. So Love tells Joe, take Gil's body back to his house. His wife and children aren't there anyway. Set it up like he killed himself in the house, and write a suicide letter that says that he was the one who killed Natalie. We'll put fingerprints on the murder weapon. I'll take it out to the woods and I'll stash it there. Police will find it. They'll never suspect us. So both Love and Joe go their separate ways and start going through the plan. Joe does exactly as Love told him to, setting up the body, making it look super legit, and Love heads out to the woods where Sherry has gotten everybody together and makes a plea to bring Natalie home, using a hashtag, of course. It's pretty vomit-inducing. But when Love goes to grab the items that they'll need for the search, she runs into Matthew. Matthew ends up thanking Love for being able to convince Theo to come on out. He says, Theo says you're a really good person. He then excuses himself, and they start the search. And the whole time, Theo is complaining to Love about how fake Sherry is. But Love is just trying to find a spot where she can hide the murder weapon. So she uses the excuse that she has to use the bathroom and sneaks off to hide it. But when she comes back to find Theo, she finds Theo screaming at Sherry. Because Theo overheard Sherry saying that if she was married to Matthew, she would disappear too. And that sets Theo off. He starts yelling at her about how fake she is and about how she's just there trying to get clout. So Love has to get in the middle of the two. She pushes Theo away, but then she goes and checks on Sherry, saying, are you okay? Trying to play the Madre Linda game. And it works. I mean, Sherry is appreciative that Love came to her aid. But when Love turns to Theo, Theo is pissed off that she just chose Sherry Conrad over him. But by the end of the search, Theo needs a ride home, and Love tells him, get in the car, come on. And they head back to the bakery. And Theo admits it's hard to stay mad at the one person in Madre Linda who he can actually stomach talking to. He then asks Love, how did you do it with 40? How did you deal with this? And Love starts talking about how the media a lot of times forgets that these tragedies are about real people. Not just cheating wives or drug-addicted brothers, but actual human beings. They start actually joking about the different family griefs that they've gone to, with Theo asking her, do you think this will help me get laid? And Love says, yeah, probably, but the sex you're going to get, you're not going to probably want. People don't actually care about you. Theo reads this as a moment, so he leans in and kisses Love, but Love pushes him back and says, don't do that. She then starts taking the dishes back to the sink when Theo gets a text message from Matthew because the police had found the murder weapon. By the next day, Madre Linda is convinced that Gil had killed Natalie in a fit of rage because the two were having an affair and Gil couldn't have her all to himself. Theo heads back to college, waving goodbye to Love. Love ends up getting flowers on her doorstep from Sherry with a card that says, thanks, friend. And Joe just heads back to work in the library. And while putting books back on the shelf, Marion comes over to talk to him. And she's being oddly nice to him. It's a drastic change from how she normally acts with him. Joe tries to bring up in conversation how Marion has a daughter, but she brushes it aside, saying that her daughter just stays with her ex most of the time. The more the conversation goes on, though, the more that Joe starts getting convinced that Marion is flirting with him. He tries to stop himself, saying, Joe, you can't think like this. But it becomes pretty obvious that Joe Goldberg just found his new obsession. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought this sucked. Make sure to be nice in the comment section. If you don't see the next video up in the end screen there, I'll get it up in a few days, not to worry. And I have merchandise, so go buy a mug or something. It's never too early to think about Christmas gifts, folks. But once again, thank you for checking out this recap.